Have you ever encountered a situation where you need to fly your drone and you can't fully comply with the regulations and wonder how you can do that legally? Well, today we're going to tell you how you can do that. Good day. My name is John Meehan. I'm one of the FAA Aviation Flight Standard Service people who work behind the scenes during Kevin Morris's webinars, and I'm on the production team. And today I get to talk to you about how to fly your drone safely in the National Airspace System during an emergency situation. Very excited to be here, and thank you all for attending. I'm going to be joined today by Tal Haley from our Systems Operations Support Center. Tal is extremely experienced and has been working a lot of emergency situations the last couple of years, and I think you'll find his insights to be very useful for you. We're going to divide the webinar into a number of different sections. We're going to talk about the process itself for getting emergency waivers or emergency authorizations. We're going to talk about how you go about doing that. We're going to talk about a few actual real world scenarios, and then we're going to have the live Q&A that you can give your questions to us and we'll get them answered. One thing to note is I also have a team of experts behind the scenes, and send your questions in, and if I can't or Tal can't get to them during the webinar, they will definitely be able to answer a lot of your questions live in the background. So if you like the webinar, please do us a favor and send this information out to your colleagues or friends who may not know the rules or the process, because we really do rely on you to help us get the word out. So let's get started. So today we're going to talk about the process. What is the process for getting an emergency temporary waiver or an emergency temporary authorization? How we're going to do that, who's eligible to use the process, how you're going to go about applying to get that temporary emergency authorization, and then we're going to cover a few real world scenarios, and of course the best part is the last, where we're going to answer your questions live. So what is this process? We at the FAA call it the Special Governmental Interest process. Some people call it, you may have heard ECOA, emergency COA. What this really is a temporary emergency waiver to Part 107, or a temporary emergency authorization for airspace under Part 107, or you're going to get a temporary emergency amendment to your existing COA. COA means Certificate of Authorization, and that is for people who are flying either as a public aircraft or those who are flying under Section 44807, also known as the Section 333 exemptions. They're actually flying under Part 91, and they need a COA to do that. This process is a fairly new process, and every day is an evolutionary day in the UAS world, as many of you know. It's revolutionary as well, so stay with us, because this process does evolve over time, and we are always continuing to work on improving this as we go. One of the very important points we want to point out to you is, if you can fly under Part 107 and fully comply with 107, go do it. You don't need to call us if it's an emergency. Where you need to call us is if you can't fully comply, let's say the weather's bad, or you need to go beyond visual line of sight, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But if you can fully comply with your COA, if you're flying under a COA, or if you can fully comply under Part 107, go do it. It's, daylight, 400 feet, Class G, go do it. You don't need our permission to go do what you can normally do in compliance with the regulations. So who is this process targeted for? Well, in effect, it's anybody where it's in the public interest to get you operational. Typically, it's public safety, might be search and rescue, utility companies, railroad companies, people with large infrastructure, incident command may need to do that, wildland fire management, insurance companies, when a large hurricane or a large natural disaster comes through, they need to get airborne. It's in the public interest to get them operational. We're going to find a way to help them get operational quickly and efficiently. And the media also, it's very important that the public interest is served by letting the media in there. And remember, it's a shared airspace, and we want to get as many people we can get in safely during this time. So now who can apply? This is an important point. If this process is really set up for Part 107 remote pilots, and it's also set up for COA holders, the Certificate of Authorization. If you're a good Samaritan and you're a recreational flyer, this process is not for you. You're not eligible. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that when Congress created the exception for limited recreational flyers, they really limited that applicability to recreational flying activity. And I think most of us would agree that emergency operations where it's life safety, it's life or death, search and rescue, that's really not a recreational activity. So this is not eligible for that reason. The second reason it's really not eligible for recreational flyers is because we need knowledgeable and compliant aviators to be operating with manned aircraft in that particular area, and you really do need to know. So if you are a good citizen, a good Samaritan, and you want to get involved with this, go get your 107 certificate, get it now, and then affiliate yourself with an organization that may need your services, and then they can call you out when they need you to do that. Now, when you make the call to the Systems Operations Support Center, and we'll have the phone number and the email here in a slide coming up in the next few slides. When you do that, we're going to ask you to prove to us that you do have an existing COA. We're going to ask you for that COA number, and we may even ask you to send us that document. We're also going to ask you if you're flying under Part 107, we're going to need your Part 107 remote pilot certificate number. So that's very important. If you don't have that, then we're not going to be able to get you airborne. And remember, for those of you who are Part 107, every 24 months, we have to renew our aeronautical knowledge. So we have to have recency of aeronautical knowledge every 24 months. So let's be sure we remember to do that too. Well, what are some of the situations where we need to use this process? Well, one that comes to my mind quickly is weather. Many of you know, hopefully you know, that we have weather minimums under Part 107, 107.51C. You need 3 statute miles visibility, and you have to fly, you have to be 500 feet below the clouds. So if the ceiling is 300 feet, you can't fly under Part 107 unless you get one of these emergency temporary authorizations or waivers to do that. If you have an active shooter, for those of you who are in law enforcement, we sure as heck want to know about that. And we may need to vector aircraft out of the way for the safety of aircraft and for people on the ground. If you have a localized flooding and you can't get your crews over to the location of interest and there's no way to get them there, you might need to go beyond visual line of sight for a few minutes to do that. So that's a good example of when it's appropriate to make the call to the Systems Operations Support Center. Bridge collapses, chemical fires, all kinds of reasons why. And if you are looking for this information, my team should be pasting the URL for the form that we're going to ask you to have at least some information for us filled out, and then you can send that form into the email. There'll be an email address and a phone number here following up. And then shortly, in a few minutes, I'm going to have Tal Haley from our Systems Operations Support Center. It's going to come on. We're going to talk a little bit about some real examples of when they use this process. So I think you'll enjoy that. So this is the form that you can find, and you can see in the chat box, you should see the link to that form. And if you're in public safety, or if you're a person who's going to need to fly in real life safety emergencies, you need this form accessible to you at all times. And particularly, if you notice in the top 2 sections, there's the operator information and the documentation section. There's no reason you can't have this already pre-filled out and ready to go, because when you talk to Tal and his colleagues at the Systems Operations Support Center, they're going to ask you for this information. So you want to have all that ready to go. And this is where you can find that form. And this is the second page of the form. And we'll talk about it in a little bit. Notice on the bottom, it's asking you for latitude and longitude. And I think at this point, I'm going to bring in Tal. And Tal, we're going to talk a little bit about this form, if you don't mind.
Not at all, John.
So Tal, when you get these forms from in from the our remote pilots who want to fly, what are some of the issues, or let's say opportunities for improvement with this information that comes in?
Well, the key to the form for us is it helps reduce confusion of passing information over the phone. So if we have it written down, then we have that to refer to as we're coordinating with facilities to make sure the airspace is available. But one of the keys that we have an issue with, if you notice we highlighted in red, is the format of the latitude and longitude. Degrees, minutes, seconds is the format that the field is familiar with. So when we coordinate with a field facility, that's what we need to give it to them in.
When you say field facility, what do you mean, like an air traffic control tower?
Exactly,
Or,
an air traffic control tower and approach. They have all of their charts in degrees, minutes, seconds, and with it being in degrees, minutes, seconds, it's what they're familiar with.
So that would be the quickest way for them to pinpoint your location.
Exactly.
Got
When
it.
I'm talking to them, that way we are on one page, therefore the same page as the UAS requester for their operation. When you don't put it in degrees, minutes, seconds, and send it to us in decimal degrees, which is the other common format, it does cause issues, especially as just recently someone sent it to us in degrees format, in decimal degrees format, but failed to inform us it was in decimal degrees format. And those are two
So you're looking at a totally
locations.
different space.
And they even spaced it out as though it was degrees, minutes, seconds. So it caused a little bit of confusion on finding the location, which causes delay.
Right.
And in a first responder response,
Sure.
delay is not what we want.
Right, exactly. And I keep thinking about another question that will probably come up is, okay, well, I'm not super familiar with latitude and longitude. What's a quick and easy way to find that? Can I use that from a USS, these Lance supporting?
I believe the Lance supports that. I believe Before You Fly app even supports that.
Okay.
I do know the FCC does a wonderful website for passing decimal degrees over to degrees, minutes, seconds, and vice versa.
Okay.
And
also the sectional chart, right?
And the sectional charts themselves.
So
they
when
will be in degrees, minutes, seconds as far as how they display the locations.
Great. Okay. I think hopefully that'll help a lot of you. And let's go on to the next one. So this is a slide that if you have a smartphone, you might want to take a picture of this slide. We'll leave it up for a couple of minutes here. But this is the email address where you're going to send that form to that we showed you earlier. And you're going to make a phone call to this number. And this is the number to the Systems Operations Support Center. And this guy here is one of the folks that's actually going to answer that call. And you can find more of this information if you just want to Google SGI on the FAA.gov website, and you should be able to find that. So hopefully that will cover that. All right, well, let's talk about some real world scenarios. And Tal's got a lot of experience. I've been at the FAA almost 3 years now, and it's been really fascinating for me to hear the different scenarios that have come through. And maybe you can talk a little bit about some of these scenarios and what was good about it, what maybe could have been done better, and maybe it's good to share some episodes where you've told them no.
Okay, well, the episodes that are displayed right here, I have to admit, all of those were yeses.
Okay.
A major railroad derailment that involved a hazmat situation where they need to get the UAS active and flying as soon as possible because it was in a major city. So they need to be able to evaluate the scene and determine whether there was any threat. We were able to get them up and running literally in minutes. There was a barge accident. This was in Texas, and the barge had got themselves against another ship, and they were unable to get a view of what was going on due to the how high the river was at the time. So they needed to get a drone out there, and it was at night. So the drone provided both a visual inspection of the activities, and they had it lit up. So when they got divers out there to look at some of the activities underneath, it was able to provide some overtop lighting to provide them a little more security for their activities.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
A barricaded suspect, to be honest, this is a very common occurrence, unfortunately. But the barricaded suspect, usually they use the drone in an effort to provide a situational awareness for the on-scene commander. It's very useful for him to be in the front of the building with the majority of his team, where the drone will be in the back of the building, allowing him to be aware of anything that occurs behind there so he can immediately respond to it.
You know, one thing that just comes up is the FAA regulates outside, and a lot of law enforcement and some building folks need to go inside, right? And we don't really get in the way for that. We don't have any jurisdiction over
We
inside,
have
right?
no jurisdiction nor requirement to have any input once they're inside of the building.
Right. So if you're thinking about doing operations inside the building, of course, getting to the plane of the doorstep, that's we have an interest in that and we regulate that. But once you're inside, that's not subject to FAA regulations. So that's an important point. And then I think we got one more here on this one to talk about.
Well, we have the forensic documentations of an explosion that occurred, but the forensic realm has greatly expanded for all first responders. I get several state agencies doing accident scenes on highways as a way they can document with the drone incredibly faster than with the survey photographs, which allows them to get the road open sooner, which of course is a big benefit to any of the people there trying to drive through an accident scene. And then of course, parks and wildlife search and rescue. I actually had one last night where a elderly woman had wandered away from her normal path, and they were able to locate her using a FLIR and drone, and everything turned out well. But it's one of those situations where they need to get in the airspace now.
And a FLIR is the forward-looking infrared radar, which allows people to see the target at
the
night.
heat sources.
The heat sources, yeah.
Yeah, with
great.
the heat sources, it allows them to show up dramatically.
Yeah, it's a great
The
tool.
FLIR is used quite often by the wildlife in their fire suppression. They make use of that to help plan for future activities.
Yeah,
as they track hotspots.
Great. All right, so let's move on in the interest of time as well. One of the things that Tal and I wanted to convey to you, the audience, is when we have been dealing with public safety and those who need to fly in operations, it's a true life safety emergency. We ask them, these early adopters, hey, if you had to do it all over again, or what advice would you give to someone who's looking to get a drone operational in an emergency? And they tell us these tips here. Don't wait for the emergency to get your act together, right? If you have an anticipated need to fly at night and you're going to fly under Part 107, go get your waiver to 107.29 daylight operations. Go do that now. Don't wait for the emergency. Don't wait for hurricane season. Go do it now. And then you remember that form that we showed you earlier, have that pre-filled out. Those first two sections, do it now. Laminate it, right? Get it ready. Those crews should have that with them. If you're thinking about hiring contractors who are Part 107 to work with you to give you a greater reach, go qualify them now, get them pre-qualified. And if you need additional waivers and authorizations, go do it now. If you're working in an urban environment and it's a Class Delta airspace and you want to fly as a public aircraft, go get your jurisdictional COA now, assuming you qualify for public aircraft operations. And not everybody does, but that's a different story. If you have questions and you want to get more information, particularly if you're public safety or if you're government, go to uashelp@faa.gov and they'll get you a lot of information. We also have faa.gov/UAS. There's a lot of information that you can find, study guides for the Part 107 exam, toolkits for public safety, a lot of frequently asked questions are there. So, and I tell you, the best thing you can do for us is if you think this is good information, please, we get the word out to your colleagues who might not be flying correctly, because we want them to fly safely. And you can see that we do have a process. So there's really no excuse not to make the call if you can't comply with your COA or Part 107 in a true bona fide emergency. So we're going to basically switch our conversation now. We're going to move to the question and answer period. If you have a question you want asked live on the air, please type in live, L-I-V-E, before you do that. And I know we've got a bunch of questions coming in, which is great, but I'm going to have a pre-question for Tal, because I know this happens all the time. Let's talk about TFRs and points of contact. And let's say, like in Hurricane Harvey, for example, the airspace gets opened up in different phases. Can you talk a little bit about, a couple of things, right? How does the airspace get opened up in phases? Why do we do it? And then what does a operator who wants to fly inside one of these TFR, and TFR stands for temporary flight restriction. It's done to sterilize the airspace to keep certain operations out while others are going on. And then how does that, there's a notice to airmen that describes who the point of contact is. Tell us how that works between the point of contact listed in the NOTAM and the SOSC.
Well, what's going on with specifically Harvey, the temporary flight restrictions were used there to be honest, to segregate the activity, to provide an opportunity for the emergency response aircraft to get into the airspace. And now with the development of the UASs, UASs are considered part of the emergency response and recovery efforts. So the phone number on there will sometimes be directly to the SOSC, sometimes will be to a EOC. Either way, it'll be to a member of my overall Office of System Operations.
And what is EOC?
Emergency Operational Centers. Okay. A lot of states develop those and have them active during the emergency activities, such as Harvey. They had one in Texas, I believe up in Austin. But either way, this communication will go through my office, and then we start coordinating all of the aviation assets that are being run. And it's important during a time like this that we coordinate the efforts, because we don't want anybody to get in the way of each other.
Right.
So we might have an area in which we have a significant amount of helo activities, doing literally lifting people off of roofs, literally sling loading bags to stop a dam or dike from giving way. And obviously in those locations, we want to make sure that we control the UAS activities so these helicopter pilots feel they can operate safely and not be interfered with.
Well, I can tell you, I'm a former Army helicopter pilot, and I don't like the thought of one hitting my tail rotor. So that's a great reason.
Well, that's the advantage, though, of the 107 program, is because we are going with professional pilots, right, which is why we can't have the Good Samaritans who do not have their 107. With the professional pilots, they understand that unmanned flight must always give way to manned flight.
Right.
I refer to it as plastic must give way to tin, no matter what. And so the coordination effort of when it comes to the TFRs with Harvey was an effort to get the immediate helicopters in, and then start bringing in the UAS activities as we're finding ways in which that's being used. Harvey was really one of the biggest evolutions in the use of first responders for UAS activities.
Yeah, I think it was a watershed event for
us. It was. Harvey followed up by Irma, which was not too far in the future from that point. So those really in the SOSC got us coordinating our efforts and developing the streamlined process as possible.
Great.
It also provided us, while we're showing you paperwork, and we live in DC here, which means we have to do the paperwork eventually, the SOSC does have verbal authorization. So an example I always use, and was real life, although the person wasn't named Timmy, is sitting on the side of the river. I had a first responder fire department that needed to run a line out to an individual that was stuck in the river. And I literally took the information over the phone of where they're at, what altitude, what they're doing, and contact point, at which point I was able to give them verbal authorization to start their rescue effort, reducing any delay, while I then went and coordinated the airspace to make sure there was no impact to the NAS.
Yeah, that's great. You know, one of the questions we get all the time is, hey, should I or can I contact the tower directly, or should I be reaching out to the SOSC? And I don't know if you want to take that one, or I'll take it.
Well, as far as for us, towers have a tendency to get a call from the public. They're not sure what level of expertise they're talking to. Now, you might have a relationship, which I always recommend for first responders to have a relationship with your local air traffic facility. But if you don't, then they're not going to know who you are. Where when the SOSC calls the tower to coordinate the activities, it's coming from FAA headquarters, and they understand the validity of the activity that's going on, which is the biggest question that pops up in the mind of an air traffic controller when he's working at 3 in the morning in a tower and his manager is not available.
Right, and we have a process listed in an order that might be of interest to you. It's called JO Joint Order 7200.23A. There's a chapter in that one that describes the special governmental interest emergency process, and we really do prefer you don't call the local tower and reach out to the SOSC if it's a true emergency and you can't fully comply with 107 or your COA, because folks like TAL have a bigger picture. They may know that there's other things going on that the local air traffic control facility may not be fully aware of. So it's a good thing to do there. We had a question come in, a great question about, hey, we've got more than one pilot and we want to get our waiver to 107.29. Do we need to get each pilot their own waiver, or can we do one for the company? And that's a great question. So if you're a company, an organization, or a police department, fire department, whatever, an entity, you want to get that waiver for the entity. And that way, if your pilots come and go, all your pilots who are legit pilots, and you're going to have a list of those pilots and keep it updated, because he's going to check, and you want to have that updated. But get the waiver for 107.29 in the name of the company or in the name of the entity, and then everyone flies under there. A great example that comes to mind is a utility. Maybe they want to use a lot of 107 certificated folks throughout the state or the region. Clearly, they want to have that. Now they're going to have to centrally control it, make sure those folks are well trained, and the maintenance, all that is done centrally, but get that for the entity, not the individual pilots. If you get it for the individual pilot could go out and offer their services to somebody as that pilot, because the waiver is written either for the entity or the pilot. So whoever has that waiver is the one who's authorized to fly. And speaking of those waivers, is you need to have a copy of that with you when you go fly. So keep that on hand. Every remote pilot in command who has that waiver or that airspace authorization must have a copy of it on their person when they fly. It doesn't necessarily need to be a hard copy. You can have it on an electronic format, but you need to have that. Here's a question that's come in and say, hey, what about media, Tal? And a TFR has popped up, I'm in the media, I need to get in there for, obviously, for filming for the public's benefit. Can media get access to this?
Media can get access, with the caveat we can't interfere with first responders' activities, obviously, as the media doesn't want to interfere with that. Matter of fact, one of the examples would be the most unfortunate campfire that occurred in the wildfires in California. We actually were facilitating a media day where there was an area that the Cal Fire was allowing access for UASs that would not interfere with their water bombing that was ongoing to fight the fire, and allow the media to be able to give a sense of the impact that the fire had to the community, which, again, this is one of the reasons why we would allow the media in, is because informing the community of pertinent actions and activities that really affect their lives is what we consider something that is very valuable to the community as a whole.
Yeah, and I think it's a great opportunity also to point out that the airspace is a shared airspace. So first responders don't necessarily own that airspace. Everybody has an equal public right to get in there when it's possible. Got another question, great question. Is there a maximum drone size allowed when operating under the SGI? And that's a great question. So really, I'm going to actually push it back to a different way, which is if you're operating under 107, as you know, Part 107 limits you to up to 55 pounds. So there are people out there who operate under what we call a civil COA. This is a certificate of authorization for flights under Section 44807, what we used to call Section 333. And those are for drones that weigh more than 55 pounds. And there's quite a few out there, and there's more and more coming. So if you're a public aircraft, weight is not an issue for public aircraft operations. So something to keep in mind. And you can get more information about that reaching out to UAShelp@faa.gov. That would probably be a good next step if you're interested in doing that. Will an STI authorization allow me to operate in a TFR?
Yes. If we can coordinate it with the on-scene commander with the TFR, depending on the type of the TFR, we most certainly can use an SGI as an avenue for your access in there. That being said, again, as I mentioned before, we do not want to interfere with any first responder activities. And so your operation might be limited, but we generally provide a lot of opportunities for the Department of Interior operation of UAS activities into the forest fires that they are supporting as they use the UASs for reconnaissance of hotspots.
Right, sure. And I knew this question was going to come up. How long does it take to get an STI authorization?
Well, again, I revert back to my little Timmy in the middle of the river. That was a verbal that took me 3 minutes to get the information I needed so I could get them flying, because lives were at stake at that moment.
Yeah.
Now, if lives are not at stake at that moment, then we have to go through the paperwork, which is the form that we requested filled out. We have to coordinate with the ATC facilities and make sure we work it out for a minimal, if hopefully zero impact to the national airspace system.
Sure, and you can imagine, I guess, if you're operating around a major Class B airport with a lot of commercial air traffic in there, that's a pretty busy place, right?
If you're off the runways of O'Hare and you need to fly, that is going to take a while to negotiate that activities.
Yeah.
If we can make it happen. Again, though, if it's life-saving, literally life-saving, the air traffic system is designed to do that. We do not wait or hesitate or endanger any lives.
Another question that comes in is, hey, I don't have my night waiver. I want to fly under Part 107. I need to operate at night. Can you authorize me to fly at night?
Yes, I can. I will ask and make sure you adhere to certain requirements for night flying, such as lighting your vehicle, making sure that your observers are familiar with night operation procedures. However, I will always encourage you to get your permanent waiver to 107.29. That way, you don't even have to ask me.
Yeah, and I just want to pile on to that one and say, look, if you're a professional first responder, and being an aviator myself, flying at night does require specialized training, and there are some visual illusions that if you're not trained on and you don't understand how they happen, bad things could happen. And so a great question, but this is part of the proactive part of it that we talk about is, hey, if you think you're going to ever need to fly at night, do not, what is that? Go to jail, do not pass go get the waiver, start that process right now and answer those waiver safety explanation guidelines, because if nothing else, they will make you a better aviator. And being an aviator, it means you're a professional. And so if you think you're going to fly at night, and I would bet most of the folks on this webinar,
if you're a first responder, you know when you're the busiest.
Right? Yeah. Let's see if we can find some other questions here. We've got a bunch in here. I know my team is also doing them.
May I throw in one thing here?
Yes, sir.
There is the issue of training.
Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately, the special government interest does not include training.
So is that a case where you're going to say no?
I'm going to say no. Matter of fact, I just said no to the FBI twice this morning because of training. So it doesn't matter how big an organization you have. If you're going to do training, we're going to tell you there are plenty of processes that allows you to get a waiver through the drone zone and other actions, Lance programs that allows you to fly legally without making use of the SGI process.
Yeah, that's a great point. So remember that this emergency process is for real life, no kidding, life safety emergencies. It's not because the boss is breathing down your neck and you haven't planned enough time in advance. But drone zone, if you know you need to fly in 2 months in controlled airspace, you need to get going now on getting that drone zone airspace authorization. Don't wait. And because as you said, this is for emergency purposes. Let's see if we can come to another one. How do I know whether an authorization obtained was to an individual, or if maybe this is like for the incident command or the aviation section? How do they know this person's legit? Who's the authorization written for, and how do they know that it's
one
legit?
of the things, as you said, was we need a 107 pilot's certificate number, or we need your COA number. With that information, we know that you are a certified 107 operator, and we have your COA information. We'll be also asking for your address and a lot of information before we go forward with activities, just because we need to make sure what you're doing is what needs to be done. Again, also, we judge every immediate phone call based on the level of the emergency, the level of interaction with the national airspace system that you're going to have. So the group that I've been working with, we have over 30 years individually air traffic knowledge. So we're very well versed.
You've heard it all.
We've heard a lot. There's always something new out there, but we've heard a lot.
Yeah.
And because of that, we are very prepared to deal with anybody that might not seem to have the knowledge they profess to have.
Yes, yes. And you know, there's always somebody with more flight time than you, and there's always somebody with less flight time than you. It's a lifelong learning.
Exactly.
Another question came in. Hey, I'm a 107 operator. I want to get my night waiver. Where is that good for? And is it only good for a specific incident? And when you go get your night waiver under Part 107, it's good in Class G airspace anywhere in the country. So it's a pretty useful tool. And he's more likely to say yes in an emergency if you've already got your 107 night waiver in Class G. He's a lot more amenable.
Well, when you tell me you're going to be in the Class Bravo of LaGuardia and you need to fly at night, and I have to also give you a night waiver in addition to the access to the airspace, I know that you're not as experienced as an aviator as you could be.
Right.
So getting that night authorization lets me know that you've already practiced with this type of activity. So I'm just getting you into the airspace. I'm not also providing you information on how to fly at night.
Great point. Another question that's come in, is this special governmental interest emergency process, is it only available to public safety, or is it also available to non-public safety? And I'll take that one. The answer is it's available to any Part 107 operator, any public or civil COA holder who has a legitimate public interest need to get into that location or to fly with a waiver, and it's a real emergency, not a convenience issue. So it is available to private companies, it's available to individuals, but it's for real life safety emergencies. So that's a great question as well. Hey, I'm a 107 pilot and I want to help with emergency situations. How do I go about getting educated and certified to assist? Well, that's a great question. You know, I used to belong to the Civil Air Patrol many years ago, and they have a great program on teaching the incident command system. You might want to talk with your local public safety folks and see what their needs are, see if they're willing to bring you in and check you out. And they would have their own training program. The incident command system is a wonderful system that you might want to look at, but that's for the FAA point of view, Part 107 is our minimum standard for civil operations with a drone that's under 55 pounds. If you're flying for a public aircraft, they would be responsible for setting up their own training program and their own pilot certification program. So that would be between you and them. We talked about wildland fires. We talked about media. Let's see here. We talked about the weight. Here's one. Are we staffed 24/7?
Well, actually, there's unfortunately only 5 of us. So in the office, we are 18/7, 6 a.m. till midnight. However, one of us is on call. That phone number that was listed, one of us will answer. Matter of fact, tonight, I will be that one answering after midnight. And we always do answer and we provide service.
Great. Yeah, so the bottom line is, for your purposes, yes, it's 24/7. Great question here. Can you clarify, do we call first and then send in the form for the SGI approval? Can you clarify that a little bit for us?
Well, again, that'll depend on the actual emergency that's ongoing. If you are literally on scene, you need to act, you need to send that line to little Timmy, call me and we'll get it done. If you're en route and you're 40 minutes out and you're on your tablet, send me the email, then give me the call. This way, when we have the conversation over the phone, I can look at the form and verify that my Midwestern accent misunderstood your California accent. And that way we reduce the issues of communication.
Yeah.
And we would prefer to have the paperwork whenever possible ahead of time, just for those communication issues.
Yeah, and I think it's a great opportunity also as part of the best practices. One of the things we hear is, hey, maybe the dispatcher can send it while the team is en route to the site. And then they're going to have the contact information for the remote pilot. And we've also had questions, hey, we live in a rural area, might not have good cell phone coverage. Dispatch can do it too, you know. So the important thing is get the information in as soon as you can, and then always follow up with a phone call, I think, though, to make sure they got it and
when
make
you
sure
have
they
an
got the authorization.
emergency that's imminent, follow up with a phone call.
Yeah.
We do handle quite a bit of activities such as a high-risk warrants, which you're planning on doing that at 3 in the morning the following day, which means send us the information ahead of time. We'll get the airspace opened up, you'll have it, and it'll be waiting for you when you wake up in the morning.
All right. I'm not seeing a heck of a lot more questions. Hopefully we've answered a lot of them. Let me just see, scroll through a little bit more. We hope this was useful to you. I have one more slide I want to show you, though. We'd love for you to stay connected with us, and I would love it even more, though, if you can get the word out to your colleagues who don't quite understand the significance of complying with the aviation regulations. And hopefully we've convinced you that, hey, if you have a situation, it's a life safety situation, and you cannot comply with the existing regs, there is a process which will allow you to do that legally. So don't be illegal, go out there and get the authorization to go fly. You can see today's presentation on our YouTube channel. It's YouTube/FAA News. If you like it, please click like, subscribe, right? Isn't that what all the YouTubers say? And then we're going to post a copy of this. There's more drone webinars on this link here. And we hope that this has been useful to you. We do want to tell you that we appreciate your service, and we appreciate your interest in learning more about the system. And you live in our communities and we live in your communities, and we just want to do whatever we can to help you. So thank you all very much for your time, and we'll keep the chat area open. My team will be answering questions for a little while longer. So if you have asked a question and it hasn't got an answer, stay on for a little bit longer. They usually takes a few minutes for them to get them all answered, but they will answer the vast majority of them. So thank you all very much for your time, and we'll see you next time.